Looking for giant mechs, military action, redheads, and science fiction? Hello and welcome. My name is Meepolis, they, he, she, and AI free. And this week's pick is We Stand on Guard by Brian K. Vaughan, Steve Skroce, Matt Hollingsworth, and Fonografiks, published by Image Comics in 2016. It also won a Will Eisner Comic Industry Award for Best Writer and was nominated for Best Limited Series, both in 2017. I picked this book up several months ago now because at the time Trump had just been re-elected and immediately started talking about absorbing Canada, and more than one person in my life suggested I pick it up. Of course, at this point, finally putting fingers to keyboard, Trump's comments continue, and now he's sending the Marines into LA to subdue civilians. What does the future hold? Who knows? Although certainly not the scenarios in this book, but more on that later. Content notes for blood and guts, mass civilian casualties, harm to animals, nudity, and prison camps. Image doesn't rate their comics, but there is a lot of blood and guts. Also consider if you want to see so-called Canada being bombed before picking up this book. The publisher summary is, quote, set 100 years in the future, We Stand on Guard follows a heroic band of Canadian civilians turned freedom fighters who must defend their homeland from invasion by a technologically superior opponent, the United States of America. End quote. But before we dive into the writing side of things, I did want to comment on my feelings on the title. For people not in the know, the book opens with a page of text rendition of O Canada, which is our national anthem. Being an anti-patriot, I don't like it, which is not a huge deal when it comes to a random American comic, but it is a phrase that some people use to signal they're not a conservative, but they also love so-called Canada, or whatever. There was a brief period where I didn't think about this phrase at all for a while, and then I saw a random sticker out in the wild with the Canadian flag, and We Stand on Guard, and my initial reaction was to say F that because I assumed it was anti-immigrant BS. Was I wrong? Question mark? I'm assuming so at this point, but I can't understand how people can find it anything but threatening. But focusing in on the book at hand and the apparently award-winning writer, I don't like it much either. Although that's not entirely Vaughan's fault, as the feelings I have closing this book come from a multitude of directions, but I will try and outline them as best I can to try and be as fair as possible. Firstly, as with all of my reviews, no matter when the original work was written, I am reading the book now, and it's a bit silly to completely ignore that context. And at this point in time, I am the most concerned I have ever been about the possibility of so-called Canada being militarily invaded by the so-called United States. Is this concern warranted? Canadians I talk to are overall more concerned about this than the Americans I talk to. Did the creative team even think this would be a possibility when they wrote this story? Question mark. In a Comic Beat interview from 2016, Brian K. Vaughan said, despite the sci-fi premise, we wanted the book to tackle asymmetrical warfare in a relatively realistic way. And you can't have guerrilla combat without significant losses on all sides. Nico Henrikon and I had already done an allegory about non-combatant victims of war with Pride of Baghdad, but now I wanted to write about actual violent resistance against a country I love, in a way that would hopefully be relatable to anyone regardless of nationality. Steve and I never wanted this to be boring commentary, but underneath the pulp and giant robot guts, it's definitely political. End quote. And while I do think it's important to break the exceptionalism bubble white Canadians in particular have been living in, that they would never be on the receiving end of the kind of military violence that the United States has inflicted across the globe, I really wish they had toned down all the cliches and stereotypes. I mean, I get they were trying to be pulpy, but now we have the gory deaths of civilians in Ottawa, victims of a preemptive strike, in a cartoon. In the context of 2025, the juxtaposition just doesn't sit well with me, if it ever would have. But maybe I'm being too serious. It's hard to tell. And there are futuristic dystopias older than We Stand on Guard that people still point to as scarily relevant. Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower and the Talents comes most prominently to mind. Certainly less pulpy, but still very sci-fi. But maybe Vaughan and the team needed the cliches and absurdity of pulp in order to talk about the idea of so-called America invading so-called Canada for their water. It's a really dark topic, and being faced with the reality of it, for better or worse, with no giant robots in sight, is harrowing. I am also skeptical that Canadians could mount any kind of guerrilla resistance, but again, in my experience, most people do need a certain level of heroic, rose-tinted glasses to face dystopian realities. My initial bio of Vaughan can be found in my review of the first volume of Why the Last Man, link in the cards. Looking at the art side of things, this book does credit both an artist and a colorist, so I'll try and highlight these two angles well. We're continuing with the critical vibes. Let's start with the colors. First, because the colors of this book really rendered it pretty flat looking in my humble opinion. This seems to be a combination of the gray, distinct lack of saturation overall, and that while there are some examples of lines and colors being used to offer detail and depth, the complete lack of both for many elements of the book rendered it very disassociated. The guts, in particular, felt very cartoonish and flat. Is this a coping mechanism? Is this supposed to make it stand out? I just found it very hard to take seriously, in any sense of the word. Colorist Matt Hollingsworth is apparently technically new to the channel, because while he did help launch Preacher Volume 1, a book I've now read twice, I don't currently have a live review for it. Initially born in California, Hollingsworth has apparently lived in Croatia since 2006 with his wife and son. He's also apparently done a little bit of everything from writing to drawing to texture painting in the film industry, and last but not least, brewing beer. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Hollingsworth opens the About section on his website with the fact that he is neurodivergent. But looking at all other parts, visual, professional, and serviceable, certainly. The page layouts are varied but easy to follow. The character designs felt pretty basic, but in a way that played well with how each person is an archetype without descending into total cartoonery. Perhaps because of my own particular background, I did take issue with the character design of Amber, the character we follow the most closely throughout. A child who survives the preemptive strike with her brother, despite all the fleeing and hiding and living on the lam, she apparently grows up to be a curvy, hourglass redhead without a single scar. Of course, all the women we see in We Stand on Guard are cut from the same cookie cutter mold, but with Amber, it just felt they took a few more turns up the idealization meter. She is not a real person. Completely new to the channel, artist and co-creator Steve Skroce has apparently done, among many other things, an incredible amount of work with the Wachowskis, including storyboarding for The Matrix, V for Vendetta, my review linked in the cards, Speed Racer, Ninja Assassin, Cloud Atlas, and Jupiter Ascending, in addition to co-creating and drawing Doc Frankenstein, a comic which is written by the Wachowskis as well. And in an interesting twist, Skroce is of Croatian descent but lives in Canada. And last but not least, Fonografiks is credited with lettering and design. According to Canon Comics, Comic-Con, Fonografiks equals Stephen Finch. Looking at the themes, intersecting identities, and elements I like to examine in each book I review, place is probably the most central to the premise of We Stand on Guard. Class seems like it comes in second, I suppose, although obviously taking place in a time of war and mostly dealing with combatants, which is not the usual framing for my understanding of class war. Race is probably third, though it was not really explored much. Citizenship is the major characteristic of our characters, followed by cultures, although they do seem to limit themselves to cultural archetypes that they feel like they can get away with, so the black characters escape largely unscathed. But we have an indigenous and Quebecois characters. TMLOL. Similarly, while this comic seems to be restricting itself to just two genders, there is a fair amount of both archetypes present. And there's one gay man, which takes me to the stupidest part of We Stand on Guard, namely the part where we get an eyeful of adult Amber, naked, from behind, in the shower. Next, frame a large coy wolf named Hungry scares her out of the shower and right into the view of his owner, Les LePage, much to Amber's embarrassment as she scrambles to cover herself with a small piece of fabric. But he's no creep, he's gay, and just checking her for signs that she's been bugged. Of course, this sort of non-consensual nudity in comics is one of the first things that I decided to confront when I started this channel, because I think it's really weird to create female characters who generally don't want to get naked for a variety of reasons, and find a way to get her naked, either just for the audience, why is the internal monologue exposition happening in the shower or the bedroom, or for both the audience and some generally male, character. Like, sure, conflict is great for a story, but you could also just make female characters who are actually not embarrassed by people seeing them naked, and or otherwise in a scenario where they are consenting for the other characters in the scene to see them naked. Fairly predictably, everyone in the book is seen as perfectly able-bodied or dead, at least as far as I remember. There is practically no body shape diversity, especially when it comes to the ladies. Insert eye roll here. Wrapping things up, I'm just going to go for it. I don't like this book, so 1 star it is. Is it the worst book ever? No. Would I have been less bothered by this book if I didn't feel America might invade Canada? Maybe. Do I continue to question Brian K. Vaughan's feminist credentials? Yes, but I realize I'm in the minority in that one. Bye y'all, keep reading, and remember, all colonial settlers' states are a lie.
And Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, an Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.